In this video, I'm going to show you an article that was on that's on Stuff, and I'm going to talk about it and talk about the comments. So this is just talking about a web page that I'm looking at. I'm going to look at this article about electric cars in New Zealand, and then I'm going to show you some of the comments that I made as replies to other people's questions, just for fun. So this is a video to keep myself entertained, but hopefully it might be entertaining and informative for you as well. So this is on Stuff. Stuff.co.nz is a popular website in New Zealand which has news on it, and they just have these kind of normal newsy kind of articles. So this one is by Rob Maitzig, and I think this came out this morning, 27th of September 2017. And the article is Electric Vehicles, Can We Become the Norway of the Southern Hemisphere? And, maybe the answer to this is yes. I've actually thought about this. I've thought about this idea before, and I thought this would be a good thing for New Zealand to do. So got a picture of a guy at a fast DC charger, and this is a very common sight in Norway, charging an EV at one of the country's large number of public charging stations. And so this is an opinion piece. So he's talking about Japanese vehicle manufacturer Mazda raised a few eyebrows recently when it announced that when it begins introducing electric vehicles and other electric drive technologies from next year, it will offer them to clean countries. So this is implying that perhaps it might be offered in New Zealand first. So in New Zealand at the moment, we've got about 4,500 electric cars. We've got about 4.5 million people, something like that. So we've got something like 0.1% of cars are electric so far. I have an electric car myself. And so the article continues on to talk about in the United States, only 15% of electricity is generated by renewable, and Japan is 17.4% and Australia is 17%. So not very much renewable energy in these places. But in New Zealand, where renewable energy is more than 80%, it's pretty good. So top countries are in the 80s and 90%, so Colombia 82%, Brazil 81.2%, and Norway with 97.9%. In New Zealand, I think it's about 85%. It might have indicated that somewhere. I can't spot that on the page. Yeah, we've had a lot of rapid growth, but when you're growing from nothing, rapid growth is easy. It's saying that 72% of buyers choosing their electric vehicles for economic reasons, and 26% for environmental reasons. So I chose my electric vehicle for political and economic reasons. I drive quite a lot. I drive a little bit more than the average New Zealander, so I'm like a 60th percentile driver. So it makes sense for me to have an electric car because I drive around 20,000 kilometers per year compared with the New Zealand average of about 14,500 per year kilometers. So all this means the key to mass acceptance of new EVs for the government is to stump up with financial incentives. The government wants a take up of 64,000 cars by 2021, and we spend $1 million to promote electric vehicles, and we're going to offer some discounts. We have a thing called road user charge, which is you have to buy some kilometers, 10,000 kilometers at a time. I think the cheapest rates, I think it's $62 for 10,000 kilometers. This is $620, so I don't think that's the case. So here's a list of cars that you can buy new and used in New Zealand, and some of these are plug-in hybrids. Yeah. Anyway, what I always find fun is the comments. So middle class welfare. So this person says extra vehicle. So still need a dyno fuel vehicle to tow a boat or caravan or trailer. You know, to go on long trips over 200 kilometers. So I mean, I use my electric car to go on long trips over 200 kilometers all the time. So we've got enough fast chargers where around the area where I live and where I commonly go. So we're okay at the moment. But I agree we should certainly have more fast chargers. Watchdog. New Zealanders are going to be slow with the uptake of electric vehicles. The infrastructure for such a fleet needs further development. The first car on the list is the Nissan Leaf. Please note that Nissan New Zealand do not sell these here. They are all imported as the price was too high for such a vehicle in the market, so Nissan New Zealand made the decision to withdraw the car. This person says a government subsidy has proved popular overseas. UK, for example, provide £5,000 subsidy and exempt from registration fees as well. Well, I don't think we should be subsidising electric cars or any car in New Zealand because we don't have a car manufacturing industry, and it would be silly just to pay rich people who can afford a new car some money so that they can have a new car. It doesn't do anything good for our economy. I replied, it turns out that the Leaf did not compete. Yeah, so it didn't compete. So when you can bring in used electric cars from Japan very cheaply that are off lease or been, sold secondhand in Japan, it's just not worth it. So new Nissan Leafs do not compete against used Nissan Leafs in the New Zealand market. That's because our second-hand market, more than half of the cars in New Zealand are bought in second-hand from Japan and used a little bit in Japan, so they're very cheap for us to buy. Votch5 says, I'd love to buy an EV, one that only needs to be recharged twice a week to do the daily 150 kilometer commute. That doesn't drop into limp mode every time you hit an incline and can cope with a couple of side trips every now and then. Oh, and doesn't cost a significant fraction of the average massively overpriced Kiwi house shed. So, I think this person's got the usage case a little bit wrong. They're pretty close to the use case for a 30 kilowatt Nissan Leaf, like the one that I have. I could easily use my car to do a 150 kilometer commute, 75 k's there and 75 k's back, and I can easily use it for some side trips. So this person is just, they're not really certain or haven't thought it about. But electric cars, you just plug them in every night at home. If you've got a house, when you get home, you plug it in, much like using a cell phone. You've got a full battery for the next day. The government needs to promote EVs. If you Google General Motors Beijing E100. Yeah, I did. And what this is it's a little bubble car that they sell in places like India and China, where the average driving speed is going to be very low in cities, and they just wouldn't be safe in New Zealand, where we tend to drive at highway speeds pretty often because most people drive through the country or drive on motorways most days. So you wouldn't want that kind of car. It could be a cool little alternative car for people who live in cities, or retired people who just need a little car to go down to the shops. That could be fine. But that person should just buy a Nissan Leaf. You can buy a Nissan Leaf for $15,000 and it would be better in that car in almost every way. Mana, I don't know. Lives on a hill in Wellington with no garage. And how am I going to charge an EV? Yeah, that's right. This is one of these problems. In the UK, they're having a go with recharging cars from light posts. So out in the street, they put a socket on. You have a special cable that plugs into the socket. It can bill your account when you recharge it. But that's just something that will need to come in time. They've started doing it in the UK, and I'm sure that will come to some places in New Zealand as well. Dave Dog says, it isn't the purchase cost. It's the short range, availability of charging stations, and time to recharge. It's just not a thing as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, that's right. And I think more fast chargers will help, and in time, cars with longer ranges will be available at reasonable prices. Just wait a bit, it's early days. Kernel Clink? Yeah, when they can do 400 or 600 Ks on a charge. Sure, most trips are less than 100 Ks, but when you need to travel a lot and need to be able to get there, no mention of the cost of them. Well, there was a list of prices here in the article, but yeah, cars that go that distance, they're in the $150,000 range here. So, yeah, just wait a few more years, I said. What else have we got? Oh yeah, compared to Norway, that's nowhere near enough. In that country, electric vehicles are exempt from VAT and purchase tax, which on average reduces their prices by 50%. Well, in New Zealand, we just tax almost all imports with just GST, which is 15%, and it makes our tax system really simple. Yeah, I don't think we need to do that. I said that the only thing we have is GST. Our highways aren't actually tolled apart from 2 particular roads that I know of. Yeah, I argue that if you take into account the running costs, then a Nissan Leaf is cheaper than any $10,000 petrol car. As long as it goes the range that you need, or you're happy to wait for a recharge. If you're taking a long journey, then that's going to work. If we are using all our renewable energy to full capacity, then any EV that increases electricity demand is effectively being driven by fossil fuel that has been converted into electricity. Only rich people can afford to buy new cars, so that would be another subsidy for the rich who like to think that they're doing good. Yeah, well, no, that's not how markets work, because it turns out that around the world, renewable energy is the cheapest kind of electricity there is. So if a big power company was going to build more generation in New Zealand, they would probably build renewable energy, and to that effect, in the last 10 or 15 years, we've had 15% of our electricity started coming from geothermal power, and I think 10 or 15%, something like that, from wind power. And, solar power has just got to that threshold where solar power is probably going to be cheaper than coal power. We don't have much in the way of coal or gas power, and as far as I know, other than a couple of gas peaker plants, which seem to solve a couple of power shortages, hot sunny afternoons in Auckland, most of our new power plants have been wind power in New Zealand over the last decade. There might be some exception, but yeah, that's not how market work. If they were going to build more power plants, they're most likely to be renewable, because that would be the cheapest thing to do for a power company. Aussie Phil, so an Australian, why should my tax money go towards your latest fad? And the more of my tax going into the infrastructure to service your latest fad, not to mention, if this did happen and everyone was driving an electric car, the cost of electricity would increase. Well, no, that's not how markets work. If everybody demanded more electricity, they'd find more cheaper ways to make it. The ultimate irony is, number one, if everyone in New Zealand drove an electric car, it would make no difference to climate change. You're just too small. Well, that's wrong, because you have to do every little thing you can, and it's all of the little things that everybody can do that will help to make a difference. And then if that's not enough, we'll do some bigger things, and in which case it's all of the bigger things that everybody can do make the difference. The longest journey starts with but a single step. CO2 emitted getting these materials and manufacturing of these cars offsets the use, not to mention the vast majority of the world power generation is by coal or nuclear. Well, the vast majority of the world's power generation will move to renewable in time, and so every time your country that you live in puts a newer renewable power station in, that makes your car cleaner. And with petrol cars, that's not the case. It doesn't matter what they do about power if you're driving a petrol car. Every time you drive your petrol car, it just makes more pollution. Whereas in time, all electric cars will get cleaner in those countries that are converting from non-renewable to renewable. The insulators, insulation, and plastic in these cars are all byproducts of oil. Yeah, that's right. So that's right. We have to learn how to make cars out of things that aren't oil. I've seen cars which have bamboo and hemp fabrics and cushioning in them, and they're used for the sound deadening. So yeah, in time we'll work out how to make cars out of renewable things as well. And if we can't do that, then we're going to have to do something other than cars. Hardwired. We can't even get the Renault Twizy in New Zealand. It's the perfect EV runabout for so many people. Yet New Zealand is so backwards they can't even get certified for road use. Yeah, because a Twizy is sort of considered to be a quadricycle, which doesn't really come into the car. It's not registered like a car. It's probably registered more like a off-road motorbike or something like that. That's just a weird exceptional case. A Renault Twizy is a little car pod that takes maybe one or two people, and it's kind of a weird, kind of like, looks like an off-road buggy thing, but they're designed for cities. But yeah, and what I said is it's good to have safe car standards. Because people in New Zealand drive on motorways and highways, we really need cars that are safe for doing that for our types of roads. Auckland guy. We're a small country, but we spent 26 million on looking at a flag, and we spend 28 billion a year on welfare and 15 billion on health and 13 billion on education for 4.5 million people. There's money in the bank to incentivize people to switch to non-polluting vehicles. It's just that the government, both Labour and National, just don't want to because it would appeal to a small number of people. There's money in the bank to, I don't know. I just replied to this. I just talked about the $28 billion, which is actually that's the superannuation part of social welfare. So almost all of that $28 billion is spent to keep retired people out of poverty, which is really good. There's certainly some retired people that are very wealthy and probably don't need that handout. But, I think the last time I saw, I think we have 2% of people over the age of 65 live in poverty in New Zealand, which is pretty good on a world scale. So I'm pretty happy for social welfare to keep retired people, in good homes and getting food and getting the power that they need so that they can have a good life. But on the other hand, it's shameful that the national government has put nothing into the fund for 9 years and claims it's balanced the budget. It really annoys me that National keeps saying how they're good at being financial custodians for the country, but in fact they just cut the budget by taking all of the money out of the retirement savings scheme. Because I think what they do is they favor this idea of if we have infinite growth, then there'll always be more people working to pay for the current retired people. But in fact, infinite growth is not possible. It's not a physics. It's just not a physics thing. So what we actually have to do is the only way you can claim that you've balanced the budget is to be putting away the money for people who are going to retire in the future, and that's why that's why they made KiwiSaver, and it's why they made the Cullen Fund. And while the Labour Party, when they were in power, put a lot of money into what's called the Cullen Fund, which pays for people when they're retired, the national government put nothing in the account for 9 years because they were trying to balance the books. But they balanced the books by cutting out saving for retired people, which is a terrible mistake. And Donald Trump even commented, and Donald Trump said, EV sales are low because old schoolers like me who will never die reminisce of the days of yore in the 1980s, where inefficient but masculine sounding V8s had the ability to do burnouts at the drop of a clutch, as well as drag racing from the lights. EV cars can't do this, therefore we will not be buying them. I blame tax dodging cyclists and vegans. It's hysterical. Yeah, no, I think it's fine to have an odd V8. You just don't need to drive them for an everyday car. I drove a V8, was it this year or last year, and it was really fun. And but I only just need to do it for a few hours. I don't need to drive it for my all-day, everyday car. Um, yeah. Yeah, but on the other hand, I think electric drag cars are probably going to be faster than petrol drag cars. So yeah, it's too bad. I know that my electric car is faster than any of the petrol cars I've ever owned. I mean, quicker off the mark. Nuclear power. Nuclear power is the worst disaster in the history of the world. Um, they're so fragile and so pollutive when they go wrong. And it's like, but only three nuclear power plants around the world have ruined huge swathes of countryside or polluted the ocean. I know it's only happened 3 times, but how many times do you want that to happen? You know, they just don't pass a workplace hazard identification. You know, it's like, have you ever heard of this going wrong before? Yeah, at least 3 times in my lifetime. And how bad was it? It was incredibly bad. So incredibly bad by happens moderately often is a very bad hazard assessment. It's not clean, safe, robust, or cheap. There's nothing good about nuclear power. It's just a weird technological hangover from when they were doing nuclear research, and just because you know how to do something doesn't mean that you ought to do it. And it's the same. It's the same with fuel cells. Hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. They're never going to be a thing, because although they're good in theory, we just don't have that unlimited free supply of electricity that you'd make the hydrogen out of. But what we do have already is we have electricity to everybody's homes. So electric rechargeable vehicles makes way more sense than hydrogen fuel cells. What else have we got? Rogan is it is time that if manufacturers get real and reduce their overinflated prices, they may sell some vehicles. The only other thing that I believe will hold back sales in New Zealand is the fact that New Zealand has a large population that require a vehicle for towing all sorts of things and need to tow for some distance. Yeah, that's right. So there are a few people in New Zealand who have boats or tow trailers. You know, they need that for their business or their work or for their recreation. And yeah, there are vehicles. I think you can tow. The Tesla SUV is really good for towing. I think the Tesla Model S four-wheel drive is probably pretty good for towing as well, because the vehicle is heavy, has a reasonable size battery pack. Yeah, you might not be able to tow a boat 600 kilometers with it. And the Outlander PHEV car is probably going to be all right for towing some things depending on the weight of what it is that you're towing. But I said, yeah, wait for a Tesla pickup truck. I think that would probably be a good choice for that person. And I think that's enough. It looks like I haven't commented on any of the other ones. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll put a link to the article in the show notes so that you can have a read of the article yourself and see if there's any more spectacularly witty comments being added to that. Thanks for watching and listening to me talk. Cheers.